coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
You know, this is almost one of those moments where I think a lot of people have said, forget what the Southport was actually all about. It actually made people rather annoyed about the state of Britain today. I mean, I was so upset about that Southport incident. I think we all were. I mean, I shed a tear.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guests, gossip and stories from the heart of Westminster. I'm Christopher Hope, the political editor of GB News. My guests this week are two former Conservative MPs with different stories to tell. Later, I'll be talking to former Tory MP Craig McKinley, who tragically lost his arms and his legs to sepsis 9 months ago. He quit the House of Commons, one yearly election was called, but will be back as a peer when he's sworn as a member of the House of Lords later this autumn. He'll be Parliament's first bionic peer. But first, as a veteran political journalist of 2 decades standing, I'm always struck by how history often repeats itself in some policy areas. And so it is with getting more homes built in this country. The new Housing Secretary, Angela Rayner, has unveiled a new planning rulebook to get new developments built in England. It was unveiled on the last day before the Commons broke for its recess at the end of last month, and a consultation is now underway. I remember vividly how the last Tory government tried the same. It unveiled its own new national planning policy framework on the last day of the summer term in 2011 before MPs broke for their break. That one had problems getting past a stout campaign by the National Trust, the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, and my old newspaper, which launched a Hands Off Our Land campaign. Can Labour do any better this time? With me now is the guy in charge at the time, the former planning minister from 12 years ago, former Tory Cabinet Minister Greg Clark. Greg, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Thank you, Chris. It just shows that there are no grudges,
No
because
grudges.
You ruined my summer in 2011.
I'm going to ask you. I couldn't get through that script properly because I was just getting these flashbacks from this. It was quite hard work, that campaign. I mean, briefly, the 25th of July 2011, the NPPF was published. Ironically, I think almost to the day in this year, in 2014, a new version of the NPPF has been published, and immediately there was some concern about it. You were the planning minister, and you didn't help, I think, on Radio 4, because you did say that you were against people who tried to preserve in aspic their towns and villages, and you said some were accused of nihilistic selfishness about objecting. You were talking to the FT at the time.
I was misquoted on that, but we'll perhaps go on to
And
that.
then the Telegraph launched its campaign, Hands Off Our Land, on the 1st of September. I could just say by the end I was calling you Greg Clark Kent because you pulled out the bag. But let's talk about the beginning of this of what happened there. Were you surprised by the hostile reaction from communities and campaign groups and the Telegraph?
I was quite surprised. I was quite a new minister at the time. It was right at the beginning of the
coalition. 1 year
into
the
1 year
coalition.
into it. I'd been a local councillor before I was in Parliament, and I was always advised, don't serve on the planning committee on local council, because it's always trouble. You'll end up upsetting one person or another.
It's divisive, and it's a mainstay of lots of newspaper articles is celebrities complaining about something, a row about a hedge, and so it goes
Absolutely, all that. And so actually I never served on the planning committee all the years I was a councillor. And guess what? My first job in government was to be appointed planning minister.
Because you were seen as someone who could just rub some balm on a wound. You were seen as a nice, very nice guy. You are a nice guy. You perhaps favoured, you were centrist Tory, maybe, some would say a bit Lib Dem in your views. I went,
No, never that.
Never that. Okay. But he ruined your holiday, didn't he? Because you weren't ready for this.
So,
no one was ready for it.
So we had a brief that we were going to reform the planning system. Yeah. It was, if I tell you that I had brought into my ministerial office all of the current planning policy, which had to be wheeled in on a trolley. There were over 1,000 pages.
How tall?
With supplements. So it was. So we wouldn't be able to see each other. This was sort of piled up on the table. Yeah. And they said, well, I've always been interested in politics. I wanted to kind of immerse myself in it and see what we had to do. And they said, well, this is planning policy, Minister. And so right from the outset, I mean, I've always had a kind of radical motivation, and my view is that that's a joke. If you've got so much planning policy, then that is literally inaccessible to people, to councillors, to any understanding. And so I set an ambition that we were going to turn this into 50 pages.
Yes.
From the outset.
And you got 59 by the end.
And we got, I think that included the glossary.
Okay.
I think we did get there.
Okay.
Anyway, so we published, we had a consultation. I got together a group of practitioners. So there was a representative of the house builders, someone from the councils, a planning law expert, and someone from the RSPB, and got them in a room to design this. And sure enough, they came up with a draft that we'd worked closely together on. I launched it, just as you say, just before the holiday, not for cynical purposes, but to give time for the consultation to happen
over
so we
summer.
Could come back over the summer. And I went on holiday. I remember I went to the Isles of Scilly that year, got the train down to Penzance, got on a ferry over to
I caught the ferry, yes.
over to the Isles of Scilly, over to St Mary's, and thinking, feeling pretty pleased with the world that we'd done this work,
You're in
out for
government, you're doing
consultation,
change.
doing change. By the time my ferry docked in Hewtown in St Mary's, all hell had broken loose, and it was largely your fault, I have to say,
Well,
Chris, because your entrepreneurial instinct in journalism. So there's trouble to be had here.
Well, we were responding. We had a lot of letters at the Telegraph at the time
sure you did.
from people concerned, and that's what led the campaign, rather than my need to write more stories for the newspaper. There was crucially a presumption of sustainable development, a presumption
in favour of sustainable development, yes.
which many felt it meant that the need to get things built and serve the economy overruled the needs of local people, and that was the controversy. And many felt it as the Treasury put that in over your head. I don't know if that was true.
No, it was absolutely part of my intention. From the outset.
And you can imagine a similar debate now with this current government. They've dropped the terms beautiful from the current MPPF. The Tory party put those in to try and allay fears of ugly building and force developers to build in local stone was what the idea. But that's now gone.
Yeah.
I'm yet to hear any kind of outrage yet. I mean, I just wonder. Well, we'll come to that in a minute. But you were facing battles with the National Trust, the CPRE, planners across the board, weren't you? I mean,
and the Daily Telegraph. So it was when I heard that the editor had commissioned a logo, "Hands Off Our Lands," I thought this is going to run and run. And I think during that time, you had more front page splashes about the MPPF than I'd ever appeared on the front page of the papers before.
It was relentless, wasn't it?
It was relentless. But actually, I look back and it was something I'm most proud of, actually.
Yes.
The MPPF that the government is consulting on changes to, they've literally done a track changes version, which shows that the default is that no one in the planning system, whether it's environmental groups, whether people concerned for national heritage, councillors or members of the public, no one could think of going back to what we were
the unwieldy
doing before, the
unwieldy
pile of paper, and the version that's been consulted on is pretty much the same as that, with the presumption in favour of sustainable development. Sustainable is important. It's not a presumption in favour of development. It's a presumption in favour of sustainable development. So you needed to show that a proposal was not going to be damaging to the environment, was going to destroy our elements of our history, or whatever. And actually, when we responded to the consultation, there were a lot of responses. It was actually widely welcomed and endorsed. I think that's when you very generously sort of coined the Clark Kent Superman thing. And actually, it eventually landed pretty well.
And maybe that's how policy should be decided, listening to people's concerns.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Tweaking and changing here. One of the big change, I think, with the Labour document is they are going into the Greenbelt in a much more punchier way than the old Tory government. They're talking about grey belt.
Yes, but I think grey belt.
So car parks within green belt, for example.
No policy should be set in stone forever. I don't think
it
shouldn't be set in. It shouldn't be preserved in aspic forever. It's right to update it. But equally, I don't think you should do it every year or so. People should be familiar with it. And the fact that they are making, as it were, track changes to it, I think that's the right
That's to reassure
approach.
other people that it's not changing that much.
And it's continuity, absolutely. And so take this new notion of grey belt. Actually, I think that's an update that is reasonable. There are, within the green belt, places that are, ex-industrial buildings that happen to be, in adjacent to a village or in the countryside, and they're not places of beauty, or they're not places that are even contributing to kind of nature and such, and to consider them to be in a separate category.
Yes,
I think is the right thing. But it comes. I mean, there's a challenge now, as there was then, to build the homes and the workplaces that we need for the future. And the thing that I am most proud of about the MPPF is that from the day that it was adopted, planning permissions went up from around 100,000 a year to over 200,000 a year, and they've stayed at that level.
Yeah.
So we got, over the course of a parliament, 1 million homes being built.
Permissioned. Were they being built?
Actually, they were being built. Yeah. So
because land bank is a problem. Developers not building on the permissions they get.
It can be a problem. There are reasons why, if you have a big site, you don't want to put it all on the market at the same time. But the homes that were delivered, that were built, ended up being over 1 million over the course of the parliament, which was the target at the time. Now, the target's gone up, and I think it's not unreasonable for that to happen because the population has grown. But the key point is that it wasn't just an exercise in policy for its own sake. It did get there. It made a big difference to what was being built.
I think some of the protections on green belt, aside from grey belt, are weaker in this document. They are saying when you need to build, because the old, it was build on one part of the green belt, you must replace it with a different part.
That's right.
That doesn't seem the same way now. I think I'm waiting to see how that develops over the summer.
It's a consultation, and I think it's important to. The most important part of the green belt, in my view, is to stop towns sort of merging.
Yes.
There are towns that you can go to on the continent and sometimes in America where there's no difference between places. The idea that you've got, it goes to the sort of essence of community. You've got, real communities with an identity. I think that's important.
That matters.
And so I hope, I think it's consistent with what they're proposing. It may be in the consultation that stopping the merger of places so that they become indistinguishable.
Because there's not much the country is built on. I mean, I think during election campaigns, journalists are forced to get around the country properly, fly over it, go through it. I mean, there's lots of green areas. I mean, I think it's 9% of Britain, 12% of England built on. Of course, Britain when it includes Scotland, there's lots more green. I mean, there's a lot of space that isn't built on.
So there is a lot of space that isn't built on, and the idea that building is ruination. That you can't sort of build places that are not just important economically and places for people to live, but can be positive additions. I mean, if you think about the kind of holidays that we have at home or abroad, we tend to go to beautiful cities. We might go to Bath, we might go to York, we might go to Edinburgh. Yeah. These are places that are wonderful, delightful places, and the idea that in the 21st century we should retreat from the idea that we can't build places, build places.
But the government has done that. It has dropped the word beautiful from the.
Well, I think the word beautiful. I mean,
it's subjective.
It's very subjective, and the point about policy is that it should be clear. What we tried to do in drawing up the MPPF was to have words that were not ambiguous.
A better word could be sympathetic.
Sympathetic, I think, is a reasonable.
Because it means having the same stone, or just like everything else in the where.
Well, but there again, take Edinburgh. You mentioned Edinburgh. You've got the old town and you've got the new town in Edinburgh, both glorious. You've got
in different ways.
In different ways, you've got the sort of medieval. You've got the castle. You've got the cathedral, and then not far away, you've got the glorious Georgian squares and terraces. So
that works.
It works. And so what I did in the original MPPF was to talk about high quality. And there are ways of assessing that, to have design review panel where you can look at the quality. Yes. And I think it's probably easier to distinguish low quality from high quality than it is to agree on what beauty is.
Yes. We're 12 years on. What's changed now, do you think, in the environment around this? Do you think that people, let's call them NIMBYs, not on my backyard, not bananas. What bananas? I can't think no. Build absolutely
nothing anywhere.
Anywhere, that's right. Not bananas, but NIMBY. But do they understand maybe the moral imperative for future generations need to get somewhere to live? I mean, has that changed maybe?
I think people do understand it. I've been the Member of Parliament for Tunbridge Wells for nearly 20 years, and that is a beautiful town. It's a town that's developed over the years. It's like layers of almost sedimentary rock. There are things that were built in the 17th century. There were things that were built in the 20th century and the 21st century. And people have children. They want them to be able to live in the area that they grew up. So people, and if people are living longer, the population expanding, they get that. Yes. But I think there are two things. One is that it should be done to high standards. And the second thing is infrastructure has rarely been provided. One of the big
sewerage roads,
public amenities, doctor surgeries, and all the rest of things. Yeah. It's something I think they do in the continent better. You can sometimes go and you can see new housing estates, and the first thing they put in is the roads, and then the housing follows later. Too often, I think people's experience is that they get a whole load more housing without upgrades to any of the infrastructure, and so it does make their life worse because their roads are more congested and they can't get an appointment at the GP.
So hopefully that will change now. Is the case for new homes undermined by your party's allowance of mass legal migration, millions coming through the front door?
Well, so just on my party's response, I think it was a mistake to make the locally assessed housing needs advisory rather than mandatory. The essence of a plan is that you've got to anticipate the future and plan for it, whether you like it or not. Yeah. If you're getting more people living there because people are living longer, you need to provide for it. And that was the bargain in the MPPF, that you basically had to provide for what you need, and that was dropped towards the end of the government.
Yes.
In terms of migration, obviously there's always a big debate about migration. I think we need to be
a
a
lot
country
more coming
that
through the door now than there were in 2011.
And there has been, and I think it went beyond anyone's expectations. And of course, that puts pressure on that. Yeah. But I think you still need to have a planning policy if the population was just growing in line with the ageing population. You still need to have more homes. A point in the consultation that I approve of is to require councils to accommodate the changing industries and the changing needs of industries, because the truth is that where we work is different from what it was 100 years ago. And so that needs to adapt
and
as well.
Working home is changing that again.
Working home is changing again. So I think there needs to be updates.
And the difference might be also you've got many Labour MPs representing formerly Tory seats with Greenbelt in there. So you might have, interestingly, NIMBY Labour MPs.
I've never quite seen it in this way. During our brief planning war that the Telegraph conducted with me, you sent some colleagues down to Tunbridge Wells.
Did we?
To interview my constituents. I'm sure it wasn't the case that you were hoping that they would be outraged.
Like we always do with that.
But I discovered that actually the kind of vox pops that were done were very supportive.
Were they?
And my experience of Tunbridge Wells, and I think the places that you talk about, as I said a few moments ago, everyone recognises the need for homes and workplaces.
It's inappropriate,
it's when it's inappropriate. So if you're serious about it, then I think you can take people with you. If they feel that they're being imposed on in a way that is kind of crude and insensitive and low quality, then British people are a bolshy lot. We are a bolshy lot, and I think we'll say we're not having that.
Yeah. Just finally, Greg Clark, I've got to ask you about how you are. You stood down at the election on your own terms. You weren't chucked out of office. You've done your 20 years as an MP. What's next?
It was a fantastic period. It was such a privilege to be in Parliament those times. The election came a bit more suddenly than I was expecting. I thought it would be the autumn and I'd have a longer goodbye, but so it was. But I'm taking up a position at the University of Warwick, which I'm very much looking forward to in October. I'm going to be chairing something called Warwick Innovation, which is bringing together all of the things that they do in science and the applications of science.
Excellent.
Working,
Professor Clark?
well, I think I don't want to use that. I think I'm there to get things done. But it's a fantastic university.
Terrific.
As you know, I've always been interested in getting the regions of the UK firing on all cylinders, and the West Midlands are very important in that. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
And politics carries on. The 6 of your former colleagues standing to be leader. Who are you backing?
I've got to vote as a member, and I will.
Tell you what, I'll turn off the microphones now.
Decision.
Right, they're off now. Who are you backing?
I just say it's right to have a long period, and I'll look forward to seeing what they have to offer as a member.
Look, Greg Clark Kent, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Thank you very much. Now, next up is a truly heroic politician who brought MP Small Party to their feet when he returned to the Commons on the day the election was called last month, without any arms or legs. Now he's set to be made a peer. Craig McKinley, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. So, how are you?
I'm pretty good, really, all things considered, having lost 4 of my limbs, arms and legs, to sepsis at the end of last year. But yeah, we're up and running. Unfortunately, didn't feel well enough to fight the election, as you know. But, life brings you different turns. And this, in my view, is another chapter, and I'm going to make the most of it.
Absolutely. And we last met, didn't we, on the day that Rishi Sunak called that election that I certainly was not expecting, and many people weren't, including yourself, I think, because you had hoped to fight a November general election, but frankly, July was too soon after what happened to you last year.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it would be a tough election, as it would have been. Mine would have been classed as a marginal seat. It would have had to be one of those elections you've really got to fight tooth and nail for. And yeah, it is not an easy task running elections. And realistically, even being an MP, even if you were lucky enough to get re-elected, it's not an easy job. We're talking 80, 90-hour week of work, constituency work, and all the rest of it. I may have been kidding myself that I'd have been ready in November, but the ball would have been in my court to give it a little bit more time to consider it. And it would have been nice to have had those few months in Parliament to pursue some of the issues of prosthetics provision within the NHS, which frankly in my view is pretty poor at the moment, and raising awareness of sepsis. It would have given me a few more months as an MP to do that. But as you know, I'm going to a different place, so my voice will still be heard.
We'll come to that in a second. Your party lost your seat, didn't they, in the election, even though you did some door knocking with your prosthetic arms?
Yes, they did. I mean, we had a pretty adverse boundary change. I never quite understood why the boundary change was necessary, but there's probably lots of MPs feel that. We lost the sandwich bit in the villages and gained a lump of Margate. So it was an adverse boundary change in terms of what it should be. But yes, we did lose it and lost it, I'm afraid, fairly heavily. A big reform vote. We came second and reform were third, but obviously, as in many places, the reform vote plus Conservative would have been enough to get it over the line, on the assumption that all reform voters are, shy Conservatives, as it were, which is not always quite the truth. But reform had a big role to play. There was a new candidate, no incumbency, all of that sort of stuff. Perhaps I'd have got it over the line, but perhaps that's wishful thinking as well. But we'll never know. That is the sliding doors moment.
And speaking of an emotional winding up of the office, you're still winding your office up now, aren't you? And you'll be out by November or so when you finally let go of the office that you were trying to pass on your information to the new Labour MP. What seat again is it? Was it a new name, the new seat? Yes,
it was South Thanet, and it got renamed to East Thanet.
East Thanet, that's right. So you're going to pass on the files to the followers.
Yeah, we're trying to do that on a regular basis, but the new MP, unfortunately, I don't think has quite got an office up and running. But anyway, I'm sure she will. I know it's tricky in the first early days, but I hope that she will be serving my old constituents to the degree that I was always very proud to do as incumbent MP.
So you're watching what the first month of the Labour government. What do you make of it?
Very, very mucky. I mean, obviously, there's bits that come out the woodwork that nobody would have expected, the riots, etc., that I'm sure we'll talk about. But to be claiming that somehow the books are remiss and that there's 20 billion black hole is frankly a nonsense. I mean, I've been on the Public Accounts Committee. I was on Public Accounts Committee for some years. And you have to say that the UK has probably the most transparent government of any country on this planet. We know exactly where things are. You've got the Office of Budget Responsibility, you've got the Treasury, you've got the Bank of England, you've got all manner of institutions looking at the nation's finances. And so Labour's new Chancellor to claim that there was a black hole is nonsense.
But Craig, just on that narrow point, is exactly what George Osborne did in 2010. It's what all governments do. They need to make out there's a problem to offer the solution, which will be probably tax rises in the October budget. So that's what I mean. It's what happens in politics, isn't it? And in fact, what Reg Rees said is supported by the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility.
Well, not entirely. I mean, we didn't have the OBR back in when George Osborne got the reins as Chancellor. He created the OBR for good or ill. I'd actually say for ill. But to claim that there is some black hole, I really don't get. But I think I'd be more interested in what she's planning on doing to solve her so-called black hole. What do they actually do? Well, they gave £10 billion of pay rises and inflation-busting pay rises to the public sector. They have resurrected, it was one of Boris's plans, this international aid to combat climate change in growing and new countries like much of Africa to try and combat climate change, 11.6 billion. Subsequent administrations after Boris shelved that, but that's been resurrected under Ed Miliband. They're claiming an 8 billion for a new sovereign wealth fund. And so it goes on. They've actually spending more on things that perhaps are not as necessary as we might think. And if there is a time of austerity and a black hole to be filled, I don't think they're things that you should be doing. And then, of course, you've got the 8 billion going towards the new Great British Energy Institution, which all I can see will be propping up projects that couldn't prop up themselves in normal economic terms. So there's a lot of waste there already.
When you were an MP, of course, you chaired the Net Zero Scrutiny Group. That, I imagine, has been wound up now. I mean, there's barely a rump of MPs left. You can get them onto a couple of large buses now, can't you, compared to where you were before the election?
Yeah, it is a shame. We did lose a lot of very good colleagues that were obviously very strong on the net zero argument, net zero scrutiny group members, and of course ERG members often went hand in hand, what I'd call the right thinking core of the Conservative Party. But no, the net zero scrutiny group will continue. We had a number of peers in it before, and I intend it to continue, and perhaps even standing up with some external funding if we can find it, as a proper group to actually tell the story to new parliamentarians about why the current thinking is so woolly and so wrong and so costly, and there's a better way of doing all this.
Well, it's going to be quite a dash for Green. You've been following the riots since those dreadful killings in Southport last week, Craig McKinley. Are you comfortable about the blame on the far right? A lot of viewers, listeners to GB News are concerned about the idea that the government's been willing to say it's just the far right. And that almost says if you're worried about immigration, it's a far right issue. And of course, as we know, it's a wider issue and a deeper issue than just one held by some thugs on the far right.
Well, I mean, if the far right are that good at organising things, then they're far better at organising things than any political party or government that I know in the UK. So I actually don't believe fully. I mean, there's always going to be some nutters, and they should be dealt with very robustly, and they should be in prison where appropriate. I'm fully in favour of all of that. But if you look at some of these, rallies that are going on, there are lots of couples on these rallies that you'd expect to go and see in the dog and duck on a Friday afternoon. These are normal people, and I think what happened with Southport, it's sort of culminated what I feel is a deep malaise in this country, a deep worry. And it sort of brought it together in an unexpected way. And I'm afraid that's how things often happen. It's like the butterfly wings in Brazil create a storm in Africa. This is almost one of those moments where I think a lot of people have said, forget what the Southport was actually all about. It actually made people rather annoyed about the state of Britain today. I mean, I was so upset about that Southport incident. I think we all were. I mean, I shed a tear.
Yeah, so Craig McKinley, you're saying there that it's not really a far-right issue to be worried about immigration. Look at the numbers who flocked to Reform UK. But isn't this this government's been there for a month? I mean, maybe if they've had a slightly stuttering response to it in messaging, all the problems were laid for them by the Tory government with these hotels where migrants were being housed and the like, and allowing such large numbers to come through the front door legally as migrants as much as illegally.
Yeah, well, you've got two bases there. Yeah, we've got the boats, the illegal migration, and then you've got the enormous numbers of legal migration.
And that's on your party, Craig.
I know it is, and I'm not proud of it. I've never supported it, and I've been very robustly against all of these vast numbers that have been coming in. I mean, I've made a very easy connection. We have got 9.4 million people in this country who are of working age, who are economically inactive. I mean, surely we've got a pool of workers available domestically to actually fill the jobs that are available. We've still got a very buoyant economy. I mean, surely most countries you would fill the jobs with people you've got domestically first, and then if you've still got holes, you'd look at immigrant workers to fill the skill.
You've got to get many of them off benefits, though, haven't you, Craig?
Well, exactly. I mean, I've been saying this to our Secretary of State when he was in post. I said, you have got the most important role in government because your cuts that you could make are good cuts. If we get people into work through being slightly more robust in insisting people get into work, then that will be a cut in the budget, a cut in the nation's finances and borrowing and expenditure. And that would be a good one all round because being at work also helps mental health and all those other good issues as well.
But even the cuts proposed by the Tory government in the manifesto were just marginal cuts at the returning the country to 2019 levels.
I mean, I'm sorry, because I'm not going to defend the outgoing government on their on what they did on DWP or immigration.
Do you think this Labour government has got it in it to do the cuts to welfare required that you're describing?
Well, they've done a very strange cut to welfare, haven't they? I mean, this cutting of 10 million pensioners from their £200 or £300 winter fuel allowance it is a very bizarre move. And you would think with their political head on, it's perhaps not the demographic of people. Often they can't do anything to improve their lot in terms of extra work, overtime or anything else. They are stuck where they are. Perhaps a more elegant move might have been to make that winter fuel allowance taxable. So those who are paying tax because they've got other income, they might have been a bit of a clawback. But to actually just take it away is a very strange move. And I don't think you'll find Labour will be doing that to their what I call their client base of normally unemployed. I don't think they'll be doing that. I don't think they'll be robust enough, strong enough, or even want to do it, because you will start to see some internal splits in Labour before too long. And I suppose to his credit, Keir was very robust, and he sort of put 7 on the sidelines by taking the whip away from them already. Perhaps we'll see more of that. But the Labour Party hasn't changed. It's a party of high tax, high spend.
It has been hard for this government to get across. They are now being buffeted by events. I think these riots would have challenged, obviously would have challenged the Tory government, been there for 14 years, but 1 month in, there's a lot going on for them. Do you think they've got the messaging right on this? Do you think are they doing the right things on this? I mean, it's calming down now as we speak on Thursday lunchtime, it seems.
Well, I mean, you've got similarities with 2011, just a year into David Cameron's administration. We had that very, very serious riots across the country, and they do tend to come to a crescendo and then quieten down. And this has followed that same type of trajectory, and I'm not surprised at that. But I think what's more important is what will the government do about it? Because as I say, there is just a bit of a seething underlying unrest amongst many of the population, wondering where our great country is going. And I think they're very concerned about that. And this concern is about immigration. And that's a very reasonable concern to have when you've got problems with housing. And it can't be helped when you're having a net migration of 750,000 a year. Unfortunately, under a Conservative regime, you're bound to have problems. So those problems aren't going away if we're going to keep on that type of trajectory of migration. Will Labour be brave enough to stop that? Well, I hope so, as a British elector and a British person, but I doubt that will happen. I think you'll see more of the same there. They don't have a good record on this when they were last in government.
I've got to ask you about Brexit. As one of the 28 Spartan Tory MPs who opposed all the iterations of Theresa May's Brexit deal and helped to deliver the deal we have at the moment, is Brexit under threat? Nick Thomas-Symonds is doing a lot of chats, isn't he, with countries on the continent about closer alignment across all sorts of areas. Does that worry you?
It worries me greatly, actually. I mean, you've got to worry about Keir Starmer himself when he was the shadow Europe secretary in opposition. I mean, he opposed everything to do with Brexit, did everything they possibly could to frustrate it, stop it, and everything else. I don't think he has changed at all. But what was very worrying just last week was the abolition of the European Scrutiny Committee, the one that I sat on for many years with Sir Bill Cash. Sir Bill Cash had been on it, I think, since he'd been in Parliament. It had been in place since 1973 to actually scrutinise what was coming through the door from Brussels. Now, we may have left the European Union, but there is still plenty coming through the door.
There's not, though. It's only coming through the door in Northern Ireland, isn't it, where there's dual jurisdiction within the EU and UK. That's the government's point. There's no more legislation coming from Brussels anymore. It's all here.
You might say that, Chris, but I mean, there were lots of things that we were looking at in my time on European Scrutiny Committee. That was the Gibraltar issue, which is yet to be settled, a deal with Gibraltar. We were very involved with that. There is the Northern Ireland issue, which, as part of the United Kingdom, worries me greatly. And there's also the issues of the Defence Pact, which has been discussed. I mean, that was all floating around while the European Scrutiny Committee was there. Those issues aren't going away, and we now have no body within the parliamentary system of scrutiny to actually look at what is coming through. If what Keir is saying is actually going to come to pass with greater alignment in certain areas, almost in the single market in all but name, then the role of the European Scrutiny Committee would be ever more needed. So, yes, I am concerned whether we're on a very slow and slippery path back into the orbit of the European Union.
We'll wait and see. And of course, the government says there'll be no return to the single market, the customs union, no freedom of movement. I should say Stella Creasy, a Remainer Labour MP, is also upset. She has common cause with you, Craig McKinley, on this. She wants to have scrutiny of the EU relationship as well for her own reasons. Just briefly and finally, to ask you, who are you backing in the Tory leadership contest?
I haven't declared for anybody yet, but I will tell you, Chris, I will be backing and supporting and being very active for if I hear something on net zero that I like.
Okay.
Let me tell you this. If the last decade was a decade of the battle for Brexit, the next decade will be the battle for energy price and security. This is the big issue for the decade ahead. It is the issue that will bring the Labour Party down, and we've got to get this right as a party if we're going to get back into government.
And you yourself, you're back into public life as a peer, as Lord McKinley of somewhere, where?
Of Richborough, which is part of my patch. Richborough. It was right in the middle of my old South Bannock patch between the north and the south part. A very rich history, not least because it's got the Roman fort, believed to be the first place where the Romans came ashore into Britain. A very rich history in energy as well. It used to have a coal-powered power station powered by good old Kent coal. That was demolished some years ago. It's got the interconnector there from Belgium, and there is plans for a big battery farm.
And of course, I will call you the Bionic Peer, if you don't mind. We called you the Bionic MP when you came back to heroically to the House of Commons that time before the election was called. Will you be wearing the ermine, the robes? Are any changes being made for you because of your disability?
I don't think I need too many. I have been in contact with the Lord's authorities, and just sort of simple things like an office nearby, appropriate toilet facilities, that run-of-the-mill sort of stuff. But I'm getting up and downstairs now quite happily. They're working with me to make the experience as easy as it possibly can. You'd expect that.
You design your own coat of arms now, don't you? I think.
You can if you want to pay for it. And
I think I want to see some prosthetic legs and arms in there.
Yes, no, I probably will go for one in due course, and why not? This is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I intend to make the most.
And will you put some prosthetic arms and legs in there to?
That's not a bad idea, actually. Not a bad idea. I mean, it might jolt the NHS into not providing so many of these and providing rather more of these.
You hold up your bionic arms from the private and the state. And of course, I know a lot about this because my daughter's an amputee too, so I do know to a certain degree what you've been going through, and your spirit inspires us all, Craig McKinley. Great to see you looking so well, sounding so well, and we can't wait to see you back in Parliament in the middle of October. Thanks for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Craig McKinley there. Well, thank you for listening to Chopper's Political Podcast and for watching it on YouTube and elsewhere, particularly to my guests this week, Greg Clark and Craig McKinley. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X, and you can email me chopper@gbnews.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, I know Greg Clark has and Craig McKinley has too, please do tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, please do leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to help other people find it. Thank you to the brilliant team of GB News colleagues behind the podcast, Mick Booker, Jeff Marsh, Rebecca Noons and George McMillan. And most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening wherever you are. If you want more Chopper in your life, and frankly, who doesn't, do catch me during the week on GB News when I'm reporting on the political events in Westminster, and at midday on Wednesdays when Parliament is sitting when I present PMQs Live. And you do keep up to date with all our best political reporting on our website, gbnews.com. Until next time though, cheerio!